This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Today, Jay, what we're doing right now, it's the last time we're ever going to do this. I'm not talking about the podcast. I'm talking about...
Scared me.
Oh, I forgot to mention.
Getting laid off.
I'm moving to Australia to
is that a problem?
The Southern River Band as their hand clap guy. No, this is the last time we're going to do an albums of episode. We've done every year albums of 1991, 92, 93. The only one we didn't start with 1990. We started with 1995 and have worked our way. We're now in 1994. This is the last one, Jay.
This is it. Make it good.
So we have broken out one of the bigger roundtables that we're going to do here. I think this might only be eclipsed by the Nirvana roundtable, where literally every patron we had was, I think, on that roundtable. The list is quite extensive. But for this one, we are welcoming back to the show Eric Peterson, Ian McIver, Marissa Bucksbaum, Chip Midnight, Jim Lakowski. Did I say that right, Jim?
You got it.
Okay. And you and me and Kyle Bittner will be in and out. He's got a choppy connection. He's trying to make it work. And we might have some other people pop up. Some fun guests might pop up when we don't expect it. We'll see what happens. But we're talking about 1994. Everyone, I'm assuming, was alive in 1994. We don't have any Gen Zers or Alphas here. Although our kids are...
I see Tim scanning the Zoom. Looking at everybody.
I'm like sure. I gotta make sure.
There's no children here, right?
There's no children. This is an R-rated episode, based on the some of the albums that we're gonna be talking about. So let me ask everyone. Looking back at 1994, I don't know if you guys found this, but looking back at 1994, this might be the biggest stuffed year of album releases. When I started listening, just the stuff that I knew, I was like, oh my God. And then just the stuff off the top of my head. And then when I started going deeper into like, okay, what about indie releases? What about this? What about that? This is a massive year. When you guys were doing your research, did you find that as well, that you were like, there are so many releases this year, this might be the biggest of them all? Don't all speak
for sure. Yeah, for sure. It was also some of these records I just really had a hard time believing they came out in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
So like some of them you're like, yeah, okay, that sounds about right. And other ones I'm like, no, can't be. But
mm-hmm.
Yes, this was a deep pain.
My question is, was this finally the year that all of the bands and scenes that got signed and promoted following the breakout of Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, that they actually got their records to market?
That's a good question. I think that's probably true, that the A&R development, finding the bands after Nirvana broke, after Pearl Jam and everybody else. Oh, of course, there were like already alternative bands happening with Jane's Addiction and other ones, Living Color, and so there was already an undercurrent of alternative happening, but this was like I feel like this was the mainstream label push of the biggest amount of material, and good material. Like this feels like a really solid year looking back through it, as opposed to when you get into like sort of the later end of the decade, you start getting the third wave of stuff, but then also you start getting like some weaker material from some artists, and that just is my recollection or when I'm looking at what was happening. Speaking of what was happening, this was a crazy year. Speaking of, you talk about, Jay, you couldn't believe how much stuff came out. This is the year, okay, that Alice in Chains, spoiler alert, Jar of Fries, became the first EP to ever chart at number 1. Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
This is the year that Pink Floyd plays their final tour. This is the year the Eagles reunited. And it was the first time an arena tour charged $100 a ticket. It had never happened before.
Right. Yep.
That was a huge deal.
The solid $35 ticket prices.
This is the Free as a Bird year, when the 3 surviving members of the Beatles got together and recorded Free as the instrumental parts of John Lennon's demo.
Yep.
This is the year that what was the other? Well, obviously this is the year that Kurt Cobain commits suicide. We all remember that. This is the year that Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley are married. This is the year Lisa Left Eye Lopez burns down Andre Risen's mansion when they get into a fight. This is the year Aerosmith becomes the first major band to premiere a song on the internet on CompuServe.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
That's
the song Head First, which I don't know what that is.
Just thinking of listening to music on the internet in 1994 is painful.
This is
I can't imagine how long that took.
Jay, this is the year the first item is sold on the internet, which is a copy of Sting's 10 Summoner's Tales on CD.
It wasn't porn?
No, it wasn't porn. I know that porn usually leads the way, but it was a copy
research here, Sam.
Of Sting's album.
You sure?
Yes.
Sure about that?
It's in Wikipedia. It has to be true.
Do we know when CD Now goes online?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Probably after 95 with Microsoft, with Windows 95 and Internet Explorer being installed on every computer with Windows and all that. So I imagine it'd probably follow that.
A couple of other things. This is the year that Blind Melon's lead singer Shannon Hoon gets arrested after the American Music Awards he actually got ejected from the ceremony and then was arrested for battery assault and resisting arrest. This is the year of Bryan Adams becomes the first Western music star to perform in Vietnam since the end of the Vietnam War. I did not know that. That's crazy. What else was there? I mean, there's so much stuff. This is the year that parody became fair use, when Cuff Rose Music sued Luther Campbell because they parodied Pretty Woman, and the Supreme Court said yes, parody is fair use. So it was a huge year for that particular legal ruling.
Yep.
This is the year that Madonna had her infamous appearance on Late Night with David Letterman. I don't know if everybody remembers that or not, but that was insane. She was like swearing the whole time, and Letterman was like kind of confused and didn't know what the hell was going on. This is the year that the Fillmore reopened, the legendary club in San Francisco. Does anybody know who was the band that reopened the Fillmore?
You're not going to Grateful Dead.
Nope. Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh, okay.
This is the year Pearl Jam filed a complaint with the U.S. Justice Department over the monopoly of Ticketmaster.
I was going to ask if that correlated with the $100 tickets.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It just so happens that when the Eagles reunite after 24 years and charge $100 a ticket, Pearl Jam goes, wait a minute. That's not... This is also the year that Bernard Butler leaves Suede. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening here. And then, of course, Woodstock 94. This is the year of that.
Mud-soaked Woodstock.
The mud-soaked. Yes, exactly. That's just some of it. I mean, this was a huge year, and not even mentioning like this is the year of certain albums and Jimmy Page and Robert Plant got back together to do the Unplugged and release the No Quarter album. I mean, this was a lot of stuff was happening. And this is the year, unfortunately, well, or I don't know, depending on your view, that Warner bought 49% of Sub Pop and changed things a little bit for that label going forward. I believe, didn't Sub Pop like buy themselves back out of that eventually, or sort of get some of that back? I don't remember. I think that's what happened. But anyway, let's move on to the albums. Let's move on to talking about the music of 1994 after all that factoid information. We're going to have 4 categories that we're talking about that our patrons have chimed in on our Patreon, and then also are going to be doing here. We're going to start with popular records that were released in 1994 that have stood the test of time. So these are records that people know and somehow have stayed good, because a lot of stuff hasn't. And we've discovered that for every year that we've done this. So I'm going to start, let's go alphabetically and start with first names. Chip, I'm going to start with you. Give me an album from 1994, a popular record that you think have stood the test of time.
I'm going to go with The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails.
Ian just lost his mind because you said that.
Sorry.
Ian just flipped the table.
Yeah, I'm looking at I mean, I know it's supposed to be quick. Let me tell you real quick. In 1994, I helped start an alternative rock magazine called Moo, first issue, featuring somebody Marissa knows, the Afghan Wigs. That was probably the year that I spent the most money on CDs, and also the year that I started realizing that publicists would send you free CDs in the mail. So I have a huge collection of music from 1994, and there was a lot of good stuff that year.
Eric, what have you got for 1994 as something that has stood the test of time that was popular?
Popular. I'm going to go with something that was popular in its genre, I guess. And I'm going to say Awake by Dream Theater. So my take on 1994, looking at the albums, is this was the peak of what might have been the first wave of what we can refer to maybe as the more thinking man's progressive hard rock and metal bands, like starting off with Queensrÿche or King's X, Marillion, Fate's Warning, those kinds of bands. And I think Dream Theater at this point in time hit probably their peak of both being technically proficient, progressive, hard rock metal band, but also being accessible pop music.
Okay.
It was so weird at the time. I just can't emphasize enough, being a fan of that band at the time, how weird it was that they were popular. Like, they were just so counter to what else was going on in 94, but it sort of didn't matter. It was just, it worked because it was good prog.
Ian, I know your thunder has been slightly stolen. If you would like to.
Oh, yeah. I'm leaving Chip and you guys a 1-star review for the 80s Metal Podcast.
You are welcome to reiterate or choose something else.
So, I mean, obviously with the Downward Spiral, I mean, I can talk about that for a whole podcast, but I'll go with an alternate but somewhat related. The Crow original soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
So, like I said, I can obviously talk about Downward Spiral for an hour, but this one obviously has a Nine Inch Nails on it as well, with the cover of Joy Division, Dead Souls on it, has The Cure with Burn. Everyone talks about the single soundtrack being kind of the definitive 90s one. No, I feel that this is probably the definitive 90s soundtrack. Singles, covers, a genre, a scene, but this has a wide variety of 90s music, and it probably best encapsulates the soundtrack, the sounds of the 90s on a single disc.
That's a good call. There were a lot of good soundtracks this year. We'll get into them, I'm sure, throughout the show. Jim, what is your pick for an album that has stood the test of time?
Well, I don't know if it was popular in terms of being a big seller, but obviously, if you can see my background of choice, it was critically popular and acclaimed. Certainly made a lot of best of lists that year, and I'm talking about my guy Jeff Buckley, who he changed my life in the same way that Kurt Cobain did a couple of years previously, and for a lot of musicians, I just never heard anyone sing like that before. And anyone who hears that record knows like his range. He could play these gorgeous ballads and make songs like Hallelujah sound completely his own. And he even threw in an insane rocker or two on that record, like Eternal Life. I just feel like he made me realize what a voice could achieve. Like just the terms of dynamics and range, and just I still to this day go back to that record and just get goosebumps every single time.
This is our last goodbye. I hate to feel the love between us die, but it's over. Just hear this and then I'll go. You gave me more to live for, more than you'll ever know.
I feel like the Last Goodbye video was played quite a bit on MTV. Because I remember seeing it and being like, who's this good-looking singer-songwriter dude that the label found and is pushing? Like, I hadn't heard the record. I just heard that one song and I was like, oh, this guy, he'll be gone and he'll be a flash in the pan. Like, I was completely wrong about that. Marissa, what have you got for us for your pick?
I am going to go full populist, but also betray my own country of origin and go with Definitely Maybe by Oasis. That was the band at their rawest, hungriest, most visceral, and their most openly yearning for a kind of rock stardom that at this point in the 90s would have been regarded probably as passé and kind of gauche by a lot of their contemporaries. They were shameless, angry, bonehead rock music, which is my favorite kind of rock music there is. And they had this joyous, like worshipful stance toward all the bands that I was raised on myself growing up. So they were, it was the wheel coming full circle for me.
Excellent. That's a great pick. Despite Ian's protests. Jay, what have you got for a big record that you think has stood the test of time?
I'm going to go with the Black Crowes and Morica. I think this is them at sort of their peak. It's also, I think as they turn the corner and the band starts to become a bit fractured, they start to get more jammy as the time goes on, the records goes on, the records don't become they're not as strong, cohesive. To me, this is like, we did a whole episode on it, but it's a super cohesive record. It's also a little experimental. They push things a bit here, but you can still tell there's some awesome hooks, band's playing great. They still feel like a band on this record. I think after this, it starts to feel less so. So to me, this is like pretty much the peak in their catalog. So I think it still holds up really well. I think we all praised it in the review we did of it. I loved it at the time. I still think it's super, super solid. So that's my pick.
Well, I'm going with Purple by Stone Temple Pilots, which was, a huge record at the time. And I think I've kind of gone back and forth on it to where I actually appreciate it more now. Listening to songs like Interstate Love Song and realizing, oh, this isn't just like a catchy rock song. Like this is actually a really well written, almost alt country song in some weird ways, which was pointed out during a conversation on Discord. And the maturity from a very, I think, kind of one note first record, which is very grungy and dirgy in a lot of places, to this next record, Purple, where it is a lot more varied, a lot more self-assured, and it doesn't have the baggage that would go with the band after this with regards to Scott Weiland's issues, and it just sounds like a band that's like hitting their stride perfectly. And I remember this is around the time that they did the cover of Dancing Days for Encomium, and I think you could hear a little bit of the Zeppelin influence on them on this record. Like, it has that timelessness to it. So that's my pick for a record that I didn't expect it to be, because there was definitely a long period of time where I was not interested in ever listening to Stone Temple Pilots again.
It got so overplayed. But I do remember when Interstate Love Song came out that it was a really distinctive and kind of a left turn. I did not expect the band to sound like that.
Yep.
Yeah, even the first single, Vaseline, kind of blew my mind, because it's basically just that da-na-na-na-na-na, but the melody he built on top of that is just so good. And I was just so impressed, because I wrote them off initially a little bit too as like just a grungy wannabe kind of a band with core. Like, I just thought they're all right. But then Purple was like, whoa, yeah, this sounds like a record my dad would have listened to in the 70s.
They were also on the Crow soundtrack. And I remember
they were
the single being the big lead-off video on MTV. And I think one of the first places that we saw the images from the Crow movie.
Yeah, the Crow soundtrack was released on the same label as Stone Temple Pilots. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, maybe it's just me because I don't care for STP, but I mean, a lot of people think of Nails with Dead Souls, The Cure with Burn, which is probably their best song in the 90s, in my opinion, and that, but it tends to get overlooked. But I mean, yeah, they just got the lead single, or the only single, because they were on the same label. Night Talks.
Yeah, I even though I've kind of like burnt out on songs like what was the I don't need to hear, like what was the other one that was the big single? Like Unglued, like that's a little bit too straightforward for me from that record. But a lot of the stuff, and I think it's partly because I've grown to appreciate Dean DeLeo's guitar playing, like just how diverse of a player he is, and every solo sounds a little bit different. He always finds really cool guitar tones, and it's I know that people have somehow turned against Brendan O'Brien, but he does a hell of a job with the production on that record. I think it sounds really good. Also, I didn't realize this until I was doing research, but Paul Leary from the Butthole Surfers is on that record. He plays a guitar solo on Loungefly, which I was like, what? Why would the guy from the Butthole Surfers is on a Stone Temple Pilots album? Yeah, it's totally random. I'll throw this out there now. What are some other records to the group from 1994 that you think are, they're big records and they have absolutely stood the test of time? Who has a few other suggestions that you want to throw out there? Ian, I'll start with you.
I'm going to go in the opposite direction of Marissa and say Blur, Park Life.
Oh, yeah. That's a good pick.
I mean, obviously, I don't care for Oasis. It's obviously where I stand on this side of the battle. But
well, you know what we have to do is we have to fight to the death now.
You do.
Okay. I don't know if border services will let us cross into each other's country to commit murder.
It's true.
But yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I mean, this album, I think, is definitely one of Blur's best, and definitely their peak. I mean, obviously, the next two albums would build off, but it's because of this album.
Mm-hmm. That's a great pick. Eric?
American Recordings by Johnny Cash.
Oh yeah, that's this year.
Yep.
Which really, for maybe a lot of us, starts the process of rediscovering outlaw country and bringing attention back to some of these songwriters that were massively popular around the time a lot of us were born, that had fallen off largely due to lackluster output in the 80s.
Yeah, that's so true. That felt like
yeah,
a pivotal moment where a lot of artists that had been marginalized suddenly for the next decade almost could kind of reemerge and reinvent themselves.
Well, this is the year I wanted to mention Tom Petty's Wildflowers, because I didn't love that record when it came out. It was a little mellow for me, but I think I've matured into it now.
It's one of his best.
It really is one of his bests. But I was a young whippersnapper who didn't appreciate the more chilled aspect of that record and the more relaxed songwriting that he did on that one. So it's one now that, like, I think they released was it like 2 years ago, where they released the double version of that record, which has a lot of great material on it. So
you mentioned Jar of Flies. So this is also the acoustic sounds coming back into alternative.
Mm-hmm.
This is also the year that Mark Lanigan has Whiskey for the Holy Ghost, which might be the most realized of his early solo records, which is definitely a blues acoustic record.
Right. Kyle, how are you? Are you able to talk?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
You are clear as a bell.
Yeah. There's like 9 people on my Wi-Fi in my house right now. My wife's in a meeting and my kids are playing video games. And so I apologize. I had to log in through the work computer.
It's all right. Hey, do you have
Just don't lay me off.
Do you have a popular record from 1994 that you think has stood the test of time?
I do. I don't know if it was mentioned, probably not given this crowd, but I would say Pearl Jam The Vitology.
It has not been mentioned.
All right. So for me, that was a big one. The vinyl version, I'm sure most of you know, came out a couple of weeks before the actual CD or cassette version. I was one of the only people that I knew at the time that had a record player. It wasn't mine, it was my parents. But I skipped school. I was in grade 13. I had to do some upgrading and decided to skip one of my classes to go pick this up from a local store. So I got it, brought it home. I was one of the only people that could ever hear it in my class that I was aware of. So at that time, it was a really special record for me. And I've kept that vinyl with me. Even when I didn't have a record player, it still traveled with me. It's pretty warped and banged up now, but I've still kept it. And as a musical, like as a record, I still think that it does hold up. It shows the band sort of leaving that Versus and 10 era and moving into their new sort of no code and yield era with a few experimental sides thrown in. So
I agree with you. That's my favorite Pearl Jam record. And I know we talked about Pearl Jam recently on the 10 episode, but that's the one where I, went to a midnight sale and stood in line for 2 hours waiting to buy it on cassette, not on CD, because I was a weirdo.
I think I bought the record and then I still went to the midnight sale to pick up the CD version of it so I could listen to it in the car. And love it. Hate the packaging on the CD side anyway.
It doesn't fit into your, it's such a pain.
Yep.
Such a pain. All right.
I got one, Tim.
You got one? Okay.
Beastie Boys, Ill Communication.
Oh yeah. That's so huge.
I would have said that if someone said Blur, but
yeah.
That's a great pick. Yeah. Let's get into our popular records that maybe haven't aged well. So things that, sold millions of copies, and by the end of the decade, even you could find them in the used bins for $1. Now that would be on Discogs for $2.
All right.
Or half price.
Everybody
books.
all at once. All at once. 1, 2, 3. R.E.M.'s
R.E.M.
Monster.
Oh, I
I saw that every single
don't spoil it for me.
I feel like this year has a couple of those where you're like, oh yeah, that came out this year. And it was definitely in the cutout bin quite a bit. All right. I'm going to reverse engineer the list that we just went through. So I'm going to start with you, Marissa. What's an album that it came out, it was big, maybe you even bought it, and now it's like, oof, that did not stand up.
I'm going to temper my response by saying that I still cherish this album in the way that one cherishes kitsch, trash. You know, it's still an integral part of my childhood, and I don't know anyone who was my age or a little bit older who didn't have a copy of it at one point, and that is Throwing Copper by Live.
Good pick.
Yeah.
You took my pick.
It was really kind of the canary in the coal mine for the death of grunge. Much more so, I'd say, than Machine Head by Bush. And that, don't worry, I won't blow your cover. But to me, the rejection of Bush was kind of colored a little bit by the fact that Gavin Rossdale was a pretty boy, and the idea that you'd have,
he still is.
Chicks latching onto him in a particular way that was grounded in attraction versus authenticity, which is, a BS dichotomy anyway, because take a look at the Beatles. But I found that the more I come back to it, the more I'm like, oh man, this is corny in a way that is still really enjoyable to me. Those songs have just burned into my brain for better or for worse, but I'm pretty sure they're sort of on the nostalgia touring circuit now for a reason, and that I don't necessarily use that as a negative judgment, because a lot of my favorite bands are sort of relegated to cruises and nostalgia touring and triple bills of bands whose second and third albums, just everything fell off after 1997, 1998 or so. But Throwing Copper is the one that I feel like there's kind of a consensus on, that it's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I'll just jump in because that was my pick too. And I don't have another one, but
GMTA.
Totally agree. There's a nostalgia for me because I loved it so much at the time. But now with the distance, when I listen to it, man, they're trying so hard.
Yeah.
They're trying so hard to be deep and, complex, and parts of it are just, corny and silly.
I will say that there are a handful of songs that weren't the hits that when I do revisit them, I'm kind of pleasantly surprised. But Shit Town is a really good track. And it's not the most sophisticated social commentary as far as 90s rock bands go, but it's a solid tune, and it's not cloying in the way that I Alone is.
Yeah.
Jim, what do you have for something that's let you down after it?
It was just mentioned, and that would be Bush with 16 Stone, because I certainly owned that record, and man, it had so many singles. It was played to death. I remember seeing the movie Fear with Mark Wahlberg and Reese Witherspoon, and I was like, yeah, come down. That bass line kicks in. I was just like, yeah, I was so into this shit. And now I go back and I listen to it, I'm like, nah, not so much. The lyrics are pretty terrible overall on that record. I mean, it was just trying to cash in on the grunge scene and kind of failing miserably. Especially, their follow-up record is really when I turned on them and just said, I don't get this band, and I don't think I ever need to listen to them again.
I still kind of like some of the I think the slide guitar and Everything Zen is still pretty cool.
Yeah.
His lyrics are nonsense. They're just they don't mean anything.
When you hear Machine Head at the Blue Jackets game, you still get pumped.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's like the great thing about 1994 though, right? Is because like even the records where upon reflection you're a little embarrassed, they still have those high points where you can proudly sing along at karaoke.
Yes. Ian.
Yeah. Okay. For me, Marilyn Manson, Portrait of American Family.
Yeah.
I love Get Your Gun and Lunchbox. Those are great songs. They're the singles. But it doesn't hold up. I mean, obviously, Gidget Gein, the original bass player, would leave in favor of Triggy Ramirez, who obviously had a huge impact on the sound that would follow with the Smells Like Children EP and Antichrist Superstar. And of course, Daisy Berkowitz, the original guitarist, would leave during the Antichrist Superstar sessions. But yeah, it very much stands out as an oddity in his discography. And I mean, I'm ignoring the whole personal side of Manson as well, but just musically, like it's very much an oddity. It's one that you can skip completely in his discography if you are a fan.
Eric.
Okay, well, unintentional theme here because started with Dream Theater Awake, which is the high point of that particular genre of metal. And then I mentioned Johnny Cash's American Recordings, and now I'm going to another artist that is somebody who massively squandered a high point in their career, and that's Danzig 4. Going from that kind of blues metal, groove metal sound that he had with Danzig 3 to a, fake industrial sound that just has not held up. And this really starts his slide from the high points of, Mother and, whom the gods kill, and Dirty Black Summer and all that kind of stuff that really, was the right music at the right time. And then he comes out with this and it's just, he's done.
Yeah, that was awful. And I didn't listen to the Misfits, but when I heard Danzig and Mother, I was like, oh, this is cool, and got the CD. And then I was out as quickly as possible on the next one. Chip. What's something that has not stood the test of time that was big back then for you?
So I have my rose-colored glasses on tonight, and even the stuff in '94 that I like. A quick little aside story about Bush is in that magazine that I wrote for called Moo. I wrote a review of the Bush album, and I think I let it off by saying something along the lines of like, Gavin Rossdale must have been searching in the dumpsters behind Nirvana's recording studio and pulled out all the things that they threw away. Fast forward a year, and I see Bush headlining an arena in Dayton, and Veruca Salt is opening. And Veruca Salt takes me backstage, and they invite me to go to dinner in the arena with Bush. So I'm sitting across the table from Gavin Rossdale. And they introduced me as like, this is Chip. He's interviewed us before. He's our friend. It was like I wasn't even at the table. Like Gavin Rossdale never said a word to me. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, he must have read the review. Which he obviously did.
I think that was his marriage to Gwen Stefani as well.
Yeah, but I will. Yeah. But I'll tell you, like that album to me, like now, like you mentioned, I think Tim, like I saw them maybe 8-9 years ago, and like those songs are part of my like. Not part of my DNA, but I'll listen to I like that record now. Like I said, rose-colored glasses. I think I was trying to come up with something from that year that like just didn't do it for me. The two one is not a music record, but I think like No Quarter, that Jimmy Page, Robert Plant thing, like I don't think I loved that. Didn't they go like more acousticy and just folky, and like I didn't love that. And then this will date me, and I'll have to look at reactions around the table here, but Jerky Boys 2 came out that year.
Wow.
Hey, they're
Is
jerky.
that the one that has L7 and all those?
No, it's like no, I don't think it was a soundtrack. I think it was just like it was more the joke calls, and you know, I mean, again, that dates it like prank phone calls that were recorded.
Yeah, so 90s. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
it sold a ton of records. There's a ton of CDs, but I think I listened to it probably 3 times in '94 and have not listened to it. I might even still have it, but yeah, that is.
I always wondered who bought
overdue.
those CDs, and now I know.
Oh, trust me, I have friends that I'm like, really? You bought that? Yeah.
It's like Adam Sandler CDs in the 90s. I was like, who's buying those things?
Remember,
Yeah.
people were buying records by Andrew Dice Clay and Sam Kinison. So I mean,
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, comedy records were huge around that time.
But yeah, those are the only 2 off my list that I can. After we're done here, I'm gonna go listen to Throwing Copper because I do like that record.
Oh boy.
And,
It's not
I
bad.
think
It's got some good
gave it
songs on it.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it I think, a pretty good review when we talked about it like last year, Tim. But
I think I was
also
the
some
one who was
stuff in-
harsh on it.
Yeah, you were more harsh on it than I was.
Yeah, I think
I had like I think a lot of nostalgia for it, and I sort of made excuses for some things, but
Again,
Yeah.
lyrically, it
hindsight,
just
it's a little
doesn't.
cringy.
It doesn't
It's-
do much for me lyrically. Like that.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
love is like water pinned down and abused.
What? Huh?
I think
Okay.
more important than the music or the lyrics, it's going to be that it triggers something in your brain that reminds you of being in your 20s. And
Sure.
Yeah.
when music was exciting and MTV was exciting, and
Yeah.
you know that it was hopefully, you know, a lot of us had a cohort of people around us who were also excited about that stuff.
Kyle, record that was popular that hasn't aged well for you.
Oof, I have 2. I think I might save one for the loved
Yes.
unreleased, but not now. I'm gonna probably have to go with Beck, Mellow Gold.
Oh.
I just, I loved it. Somebody recommended it to me when I was in high school. I listened to it, loved it, bought the CD, played the hell out of it. And I think I still to this day play Loser on a regular basis. I mean, the slide guitar in Loser is such a hard thing to get away from. But it's such a slog to get through the rest of the album. It does not resonate with me to this day. I like Beer Can. I think Beer Can's a pretty cool tune. Pay No Mind is okay, but the lyrics, the delivery, I find it super sloppy. And I know that that's what he was going for at the time. I think just now and hearing what he became, I just think for me, it's just not a great record in his catalog. So.
Jay, what you got? I know you've had some stuff stolen.
I already said my piece on Throwing Copper. That's what I
Okay.
had.
Okay. So I'm going to say something. I'm going to say an album here, and I'm probably going to blow some minds. But
Uh-oh.
so I went to see Page Plant in '95 at Gund Arena in Cleveland. The opening band was Rusted Root. And for a short period of time, I was very into Rusted Root.
Oh my
Now,
gosh!
I wasn't the
feel
only
like-
one
Send
I
me
feel
on
like I
my
don't
way,
even know
man.
you.
because they sold 1 million copies of When I Woke, which came out in 1994 in 2 years. 500,000
Who are
one year,
you?
500,000.
Who
Look,
are you?
They opened for Page Plant. I was enamored with Page Plant because I was a huge Led Zeppelin fan. So when I saw them, I was like, yeah, man, yeah, I get this. I get the hippie dance and stuff. Okay, that's cool. I don't know when I turned, but I turned pretty quickly after that. But yeah, I was definitely into Rusted Root for like a good year or two. And then I don't even think I listened to the next record.
So glad I didn't know you then.
You didn't know me then. Yeah, it's okay. You would have seen me. I would have had my, I would have been kicking the beanbag around. What's the hacky sack? I would have been hacking the sack. And
I met you like maybe 2 years later after that fever had broke.
yes, exactly. So that band and that record have not stood up for me. this stood the test of time, and I probably would have said that in 1996. Like, what was I thinking? Why was I into this band?
Shouldn't they be on permanent tour with Fish at this point?
Are they still an active band? I guess they went on hiatus in 2015 according to their Wikipedia. I just clicked onto that. So yeah, you would seem like they could just do that forever, like Fish, and just go around and whatever. But yep. So why don't we move to this has got to be the popular one. Overlooked albums at the time that were discoveries later on. So I'm sure everybody has a long list. Let's do one now, and then we'll do the group thing afterwards. But I'm going to go now in, let's see. I'm going to start with Ian, because Ian's like, he's ready.
I don't want my thunder stolen on this one. Portishead, Dummy, phenomenal album. And I knew them because the year before with Dry Dollar, they did remixes for Depeche Mode, for Walking in My Shoes, and In Your Room, those singles. When this came out and I listened to it, I was blown away. And this is definitely an album that is a fine wine. It just keeps getting better, but it just doesn't have that broad love. I don't know why. I mean, everyone would say, "Oh, the trip hop genre," and it's not really. It's a scene, it's a sound, but it's not really a genre. But when it comes to that, everyone points to Massive Attack, and these guys just get overlooked, and it's like, I don't know why, but it's definitely one I highly recommend, and worthy album.
Great pick.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, totally.
Let's go with Jim. What's your pick for an overlooked record?
Well, this is an interesting one because I wanted to go back and listen to it on Spotify. But apparently, and this is just something I'm warning the listeners ahead of time, every song gets abruptly cut off. So whoever digitized this particular record did a very bad job, and I'm not happy. I'm talking about The Mistaken with Santa Fe. And for fans of Silver Jews, definitely check this out. And it has a little bit of a Velvet Underground, Jonathan Richman feel to the music at times. And it's fronted by a guy named Greg Turner, who used to front the Angry Samoans. But I think I just have to go out and re-buy the CD because it was such a really slept upon record at the time. And I absolutely love this sound, this style, and of course his lyrics, because I'm a lyrics guy, clearly. And yeah, I just wish people would go out there and discover this, but this is one of those that you probably have to do some deep digging for. Because yeah, like I said, the streaming service, when I went back to listen to it on Spotify, they even misspelled the title of the record, and I'm like, what is going on here? So I almost want to like write to Spotify and be like, hey, take this off.
Dear Mr. Spotify.
Yeah, whoever's running that show over there has to look into this one, because I wasn't happy. But The Mistaken with Santa Fe is a record that I hope people go and seek out, especially if you're a David Berman guy like me.
So did you go listen to the Angry Samoans?
Yeah, I went back and listened to them for sure, and they're great.
Cool. Eric, I'm calling you because you talked.
So I did not plan any of these to connect this way, but my last pick was Danzig, who most of us think of now as being, the front man of the Misfits. A lot of people consider the greatest horror punk band of all time. So my record is probably the best horror punk record of 1994, and that is Born in the Basement by the Groovy Ghoulies. So very much a Ramones, Misfits inspired pop punk, but they always had an element of bubblegum pop and psychedelic music, and even a little bit of like Neil Young roots rock in their sound. And with this record, they start off with like an intro song, and then they go right into a Partridge Family song, and then a 13th Floor Elevator song, and they cover Love, and they cover Bob Dylan. This is just a solid pop punk, garage punk record. And they don't really hit their accessible peak until their next record, but this is definitely that record that comes after their first full length, but before their third one, where they kind of solidify into the great band. So Born in the Basement by the Groovy Ghoulies.
Very cool. I've listened to the Groovy Ghoulies because of you, because you brought them to this podcast many, many years ago. Marissa, what's your pick for overlooked at the time but discovered later?
Rochambeau by the Greys.
Okay, it started a long time ago when I was a little boy. Sometimes the little one don't do what he's told, and mother puts back his toy. Yes, there is something you can do, my love. Won't you help me through these troubled times? And serve to remind that everything is gonna be alright.
Just
Great pick.
absolutely outrageous, so good. It could only happen once and never again, I guess. My idea of a super group, I think inspired, if I recall correctly, by either John Bryan or Jason Faulkner having listened to Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies and thinking, I want to, do something, I guess, sort of akin to this or in this kind of vein. And just in terms of the sheer strength of the songwriting, I remember what's the first track? My jaw just fell off its hinges when I heard it for the first time and stayed there as I listened to the whole thing. So
yeah, the way the lead guitar and his vocals just sync perfectly in that opening song just blows my mind every time.
Yep,
So
head
good.
exploding moment, absolutely.
Yeah.
And from, not every album when you listen to it the first time is it like, you don't feel the earth move necessarily. This one I felt it.
Excellent pick. Kyle, what's your pick? Overlooked record, later discovery.
I see the picture in the background there, but not sure if it was mentioned. I'm going to have to go with Jeff Buckley's Grace. I had no idea who he was in 1994, like zero idea. 95, 96, 97, still no clue. And then unfortunately he dies in 98, 97, 98. And then I was like, who is this guy that everybody keeps talking about? Put on Grace, blown away. My girlfriend and I, who is now my wife, probably listening in the background, we both became obsessed with Jeff Buckley. We went out and bought all the EPs, all the live albums, the DVDs. He released, Mystery White Boy. We didn't like the US version because it had 3 songs that weren't included on the Australian version. So we ordered the Australian version, which at that time was probably around $60, which was a lot for a CD. I think at this point we have her copy of Grace, my copy of Grace, the deluxe copy of it, and we have it on vinyl. So yeah, it's to me that's a mind-blowing album, and I love it through and through.
An all-timer for sure.
Yeah.
It never gets old, and it's I don't know why I never paid attention to him. I mean, obviously he wasn't sort of on the radio. I mean, there was nothing that I could think of that would be on the radio at the time, but yeah, glad I did discover him though when I did. So
Great pick. Jay, what do you got?
So I discovered this a little late, but so it would have been like 95 or 96. It was a dollar bin pick. The band's called Angelfish, and the singer is Shirley Manson, who goes on to be in Garbage a little later.
Mhm.
But I'd gotten this before I'd ever heard of Garbage, and just picked it up because the album cover looked cool and it cost $1, and was just blown away. It's gothy, it's edgy, it's got some really solid songwriting going on. Everything's trim and to the point. It's melodic. It's got some great guitar work on it, some chunky riffs and some nice melodic leads. It's almost like if Shirley Manson did a record with the Cult around the Love era, That's to me kind of where it's hitting that sweet spot. So I loved it at the time. We reviewed it. I think I'm sure I gloated about it in the review. I still love it now. It's a great record.
So the record I'm going to pick is because of you, Jay, you and Keith. I was only very passingly familiar with the Cult, and I did not get into the self-titled album from 1994 until many years later. And I think it's probably considered the biggest oddball of their career.
Yeah.
But it's such an interesting record. It's so different from everything you would expect from the Cult, but somehow still works in a very strange and weird way. Like the opening track could not sound less like a Cult song, and is still somehow one of the coolest sounding piano. I don't even know what to call it. Piano rock songs. That there you go, right there. And anytime I'm in a store,
sorry,
I was gonna say, anytime I'm in a store and I see a picture of like a R.E.M or something like that, I take a picture, I text it to Jay, and he knows exactly why I'm sending it to him. That's probably happened like 4 or 5 times over the years. Just random pictures of R.E.Ms in stores. But yeah, that record is, I only knew the Cult really from a couple singles. I did not get into them until the late 90s, and then went back and like got into the records and going forward and exploring stuff. I think also it's not this year, but then the Holy Barbarians record comes out like I think maybe 96, and then Ian Astbury's solo record after that. So but this was the sort of the start of it, and I probably didn't listen to this record until 97. It's probably when it was handed to me to check out. So that's the one that I got to pretty late. I'm going to throw it out there. A few other ones that maybe you have in your list that you'd like to suggest out there. Chip is raising his hand, so I'm going to say, Chip, go ahead.
Well, just say I didn't go. So because I didn't go, I'm going to cheat. I got 3 answers. Jeff Buckley as one.
You didn't go? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Same thing with Kyle. So I had a friend who was a Sony college rep, and I would go to his house and he'd say, bring a bag, and I'd fill up the bag full of CDs, and I'd take them home, and I'd pick out the ones I really wanted to keep, and I'd take the rest and sell them and trade them in for beer money or for other CDs. Jeff Buckley's Grace I never put on. It always was at the top of that pile to take back, and I always, right before going to the store, pulled it out and said, I'm going to hang on to this until the next time, and I'm going to give it a listen before. And I kept doing that. And like Kyle, I eventually got to it, and I was like, oh my God, like this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. Marissa mentioned Oasis earlier. Same Sony college rep called me and said, I'm going to Cleveland to see this band from the UK called Oasis. Now, in my mind, he said, they are, I can't remember exactly the words he used, but he essentially said, he's like, they're like Pearl Jam. And he gave me the CD, and I listened to him like, they don't sound anything like Pearl Jam. What he meant was the way that they're blowing up, they're going to be like a big band, not like they sound like Pearl Jam. But so I didn't go see them at the Grog Shop in Cleveland, which holds like 150 people. And to this day, I'm so mad that I did not go to that show, because
oh my God,
it's Oasis. But like I said, I threw on the CD. I'm like, this isn't grunge. What's he talking about? And I misinterpreted why he said. My real answer, though, is, and it's an album that I loved when it came out, but I think it's overlooked, is Superchunk's Foolish. My favorite Superchunk album, and I've seen them maybe, I don't know, a few times since 94. And like every time I've seen them, like my dream is that they play that album start to finish, or at least a lot of those songs. And at least the times that I've seen them, like I'm sort of lucky to get one song from that record. And I'm like, that record is so good. And like, I don't know if they don't like it, or if they overplayed it when they put it out, and I don't know the reasoning for not playing a ton of stuff off that record, but that is by far my favorite Superchunk record.
I'm sorry for the oversight, Chip.
No worries.
I'm so used to talking to you, I just assumed that I already did.
I thought you knew that I was going to have a long answer, so that's why you waited till the end.
That's also yes, that's exactly the reason. Marissa, I saw you excitedly wanting to get in there.
Dada, American Highway Flower, which they are actually touring, I think, off Puzzle, which was the bigger album. They are doing like a West Coast, and I think, they're doing kind of one of those scattered circuits where they hit a bunch of sort of random cities that don't really make a lot of sense to me, but I am flying out to LA to see them next month. It for me was the Grower Dada album. I really love the band now and fell in love with them after seeing them live. But it's an interesting record because it's got all that beautiful melodicism that I feel like characterizes the group, but there's the title is apt. It's kind of this meandering, I don't want to say proggy album, but it's definitely more experimental and less straightforward than Puzzle was. And it's just the more you listen to it, the better it gets. And I'm trying to think of what like my exemplary songs on that are, but it's got this great satirical bent to it as well. Like Scum as a track comes to mind. So if you haven't checked it out yet, it's a sophomore, but definitely not a slump, and I endorse it heartily.
Okay.
They're more than just the Disneyland band. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ian.
Okay, I've got 3 here, and coincidentally, they're all British as well. I mentioned one already. Next one on my list is Massive Attack, Protection. Everyone goes to Mezzanine as the gold standard album, and rightfully so, but they've got other great stuff in their discography. Check it out. Next one would be Underworld, Dub No Bass with My Headman. Great album as well. And then the third one, The Prodigy, Music for the Jilted Generation. They got a lot more airplay and recognition and with the 96 single for with Firestarter, and then obviously 97 with Fat of the Land. But this is a great album as well, and definitely up there with that album, Fat of the Land. So those are my 3.
I'm glad you mentioned The Prodigy. I just have to mention this really quickly because it's such a weird thing. My neighbor, who lives across the street, he's a little bit older than me. I'm turning 50 this year. He's like mid 50s. He is really in electronic music. And he was saying like, he was really, being 5 years or so older than me in 1994 puts him at like, he's like in his mid 20s, and he was like burnt out on music. Like he couldn't find anything. He was into like dance music and underground stuff and couldn't find anything. And he said he heard the Prodigy's album, like the one you mentioned, and he like totally revitalized his love of music again. And he still goes to like electronic music shows, like when there's like bands coming through town. And he went like last year with one of our other neighbors and got so drunk he got into a fight. I'm just like, dude, you have kids. You have a house and a mortgage. You can't be getting into fights with people at rave shows or whatever. Like that's let the young kids do that. Let the young kids do the brawling. But
they also don't do it at raves by and large, which are all about, peace, love, unity, respect.
Right. I'm trying to remember what show it was, but it was like some industrial or electronic band. And yeah, he had like came home with bloody nose and didn't remember anything because he got so drunk. Like, what is going on? Anyway, Jan, I hope you hear this because that was quite funny. We all enjoyed your stories afterwards. Who else had Jim? I see you had the virtual hand up.
Yes, I got a few in mind. There's this band called The Watchmen with In the Trees. I think they're out of Winnipeg, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they're Canadian. Yeah, Winnipeg.
They are.
Yeah, and they're so good. Man, like maybe a little Buffalo Tom here and there, but a little harder edged at times. Like All Uncovered is one of the best songs of the year as far as I'm concerned. So if you just seek that track out, and if it clicks with you, the rest of the album should as well. There's Sick of It All with Scratch the Surface, which is just bombastic hardcore punk with just these killer distorted bass lines, which is totally my jam. I really love the Diggable Planets record from this year. I think that often gets overlooked, and it's just got a little bit of everything on it. It's not just hip hop. It's got a lot of jazz and a lot of different flavors going on in terms of the sampling. They did a lot of really interesting techniques with what they do on that album in particular.
They're playing in Columbus tonight, actually. I did see that the venue that they're playing at was offering buy one get one free tickets, and like I debated going, and I actually forgot it was tonight. Otherwise, I probably would have checked it out. But,
I should see if they're playing Chicago soon.
If it had been a weekend show, I would have gone because my wife would definitely have wanted to see them.
Yeah, they're killer. And Shudder to Think is a band that I got into later down the road, especially once I became more aware of Craig Wedren and like all the work he's done as a composer for a lot of films and soundtracks and things like that. And oddly enough, he also worked with Jeff Buckley for a really great song off the First Love Last Rites soundtrack. So I really, really dig, especially the single off of that particular record, Shudder to Think, Pony Express record. They're such a unique, weird, and interesting band. They're hard to categorize.
I do have to say about that record, that magazine I wrote for, one of the reviewers, I will never forget, he was not a fan.
Sure.
And I think his review was very Pitchfork-esque in that it was a 3-word review, and it said shudder to stink. And that was his review.
Oh, yeah. That's a shit sandwich.
That's so dismissive. Yeah.
That's not cool, man.
Yeah.
That's not cool at all. Jay, you raised your hand like a good.
Yeah, I can't get out of here without talking about Satchel.
Yes.
EDC. And this was an interesting discovery for me because I was a huge fan of Brad. And at this time, right, there's no internet. So that Brad album came out. It sort of like went right to the discount bin. I love Sean Smith. I didn't even know who he was. I just knew the singer on that Brad album was awesome and incredible. Goes radio silent. Like, I don't know who that person is. I don't ever hear another Brad record. Then in 96, I see the Beautiful Girls movie and get the soundtrack. And there's that voice. I remember sitting in the movie theater and Suffering comes on in the movie. And I'm like, I know that voice. Like, what is this? It kind of freaked me out. Like,
you're one of like 5 people who saw that.
I know. Theater. It was so weird. It was like, I know who's singing, but I don't know who this is. So I sat through the credits and saw the name Satchel and then went out and got the record, which it had been out at that point 2 or 3 years. Not only did you get, great Sean Smith performances, but also introduced me to Reagan Hagar, who's a super underrated drummer. Amazing grooves on this record. Some great ballads, some cool Brad type stuff that's a little trippy and heavy at times. But yeah, I can't get out of here without mentioning that record.
Great pick. Thank you for mentioning that. Kyle with the raised hand.
Yep. So yeah, I got a couple. I mean, I listened to the radio quite a bit and didn't listen to a lot of heavier stuff at the time, sort of that outlier heavier anyway. But some of the stuff on my list is the Melvin Stoner Witch. I've become a pretty big fan of that album. Betty by Helmet is one of my favorites as well. Toadies Rubberneck. I knew, what was it? What's that? Possum
Kingdom.
Possum Kingdom.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many other great songs on that album. I wish I knew it back before then. What else have I got? Sugar, File Under Easy Listening, and Material Issue, and probably get me ostracized, but Korn. Their debut came out that year. I didn't discover it until nu metal kicked in, and man, I love that album.
Don't worry, we'll let you stay.
Okay. Man, I was late and I like Korn.
Oh boy. A couple that I was late to. One was For Your Own Special Sweetheart by Jawbox. I didn't listen to Jawbox until probably the end of the decade. I didn't have any knowledge of that band existing, and then I don't remember how I got into them. It might have been through Keith, when we were rooming together for a summer. B1000 by Guided by Voices. That was a band I did not know about, even though I like kind of knew they existed. I just didn't know where to even go with that band. And I didn't really get into Guided by Voices until the early 2000s. I think I was like kind of aware when the Do Your Collapse album came out, because the Teenage FBI single was kind of big and it was played on radio. And then Isolation Drills came out, and I was like, oh, okay, I like some of these songs. And that's probably when I started going backwards and listening to Alien Lanes and B1000 and stuff like that.
I think if Phil was here, that would have been his pick at the start of the episode.
Yes, you're probably right about that. One that came to us from our dear friend who passed last year, Stephen John, is the album Ignore Us by Into Another. It was what we reviewed on the podcast, and it is a wild record. It is a post-hardcore record with a dude who is just shredding on top of it, and it does not sound like any other post-hardcore record that I can think of. It was a really interesting listen, and I'm glad that Stephen and Vadim brought that to us, because that was a great album. We've actually reviewed a lot of records from 1994. Jay, you mentioned like Angelfish, and Marissa, you mentioned Dada. What else? Who else?
Live, Satchel.
Portishead was mentioned. Mark Lanigan was mentioned. Nobody mentioned one of the biggest records, which was Null's album Absolute Zero, which Jay will remember is the only album that we reviewed that was never actually like released. It was a part of a comic book.
Has to be the most obscure album we've ever released.
Well, I was funny because I went and looked back at our entry on the website, and all the links are broken that I put to find the album. So good luck trying to find the record, because all those websites are gone. That I don't know anybody who has a copy of that record anywhere in the world. If you do, that's great. I'm glad for you. Another one was I didn't get into until the late 90s was not Guided by Voices, Girls Against Boys. I got into them with the Freakonica record and then worked back, which is totally unlike any of their other records. This is the year of Cruise Yourself, and I absolutely love Girls Against Boys now. So that was one I came to much later. Okay, last category.
Chip's hands up.
Oh, Chip, I'm sorry. Chip, you're muted.
I am. How do we make it this far and nobody mentioned Failure's first album came out in 94, Magnified?
True. I don't love that record.
I don't think I do.
There's some
either.
good songs on the record.
Yeah, there's like 2 or 3
but it's
really good songs.
Not my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, fair.
Wait, is this the year of Magnified? Isn't Comfort the first record?
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, Magnified.
Oh, you're right.
Record. Yeah,
Magnified.
Comfort.
I do like Magnified better than Comfort. The first record is very raw. Magnified is a good record.
They're starting to form their sound at that point.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I don't think of them as like fully forming until Kelly Scott joins on drums, and then the band is like fully realized. But there are some really good songs on this record, like Bernie and a few other ones. Let's get into, this might be a painful one, albums that you absolutely loved when they came out, but they've fallen off for you. They don't have to be big albums like we talked about before. These could be things that you were really into in the 90s, and not everybody else was, and now you're like, why was I into Rusted Root? I don't understand. Why was that a thing? Millions were. I want to point that out. They did go platinum with that record.
You just keep telling yourself that.
They sold 1 million records and they weren't all my purchases.
That's how Tim's going to put himself to bed tonight. Millions were in. Millions loved it. Millions.
I'm not alone.
They went platinum. It's okay.
Kyle, do you have any records that you were a big fan of that you love that are now not a part of your music consumption anymore?
Yeah, R.E.M. Monster. It was mentioned earlier. I mean, when it first came out, I mean, Automatic for the People is probably one of my favorites of theirs, next to New Adventures in Hi-Fi. But I mean, obviously this predates that. But when it first came out, it was really exciting to listen to it and hear it. And it's like, okay, yeah, they're going to take this in a whole new direction. Now going back, it's just every song sounds exactly the same, that full-on reverb, fuzzed out. You know, Michael Stipe just like covers up his vocals with something, I don't know what. It's not auto-tune because that wasn't around, but it just does not sound good anymore. I mean, What's the Frequency, Kenneth is still, you know, it's still a fun song. It's great. I don't know if it's nostalgia that kicks in with that one, but I mean, when that guitar kicks in, it's fantastic. But I mean, from there on in, probably until the last 3 tracks, it's super boring, and I can't get into it anymore.
Yeah, I told myself for a long time that was my favorite R.E.M. record, and I had to finally be like, no, this isn't where it's at.
I honestly think that if it wasn't an R.E.M. album, it would have been forgotten. Like, I think it would have just been passed by the wayside. And I mean, not that it hasn't, because I mean, every used music store has hundreds of copies of it and whatnot. But
oh yeah,
I still got suckered into buying it on vinyl though when they re-released it. But
Chip is aware there was a record store. I don't think it's there anymore, but it was over in like the 161 area, and they had like 10-cent CDs all the way up until like COVID, and they had like 400 copies of R.E.M.'s Monster all together. Just a wall.
Yeah.
And they, like there were a couple of albums
and Joan Osborne.
Joan Osborne's, yep.
And the Joan Osborne album.
Like hundreds.
Buybacks.
400 copies of Monster in a row would look pretty cool, I think, though, just with the spine.
There was probably, I mean, there were thousands of CDs in that store, and I would find one out of place. Like I'd find an R.E.M. Monster somewhere else, and I'd walk it back over. Like, how did you get away from the rest of the group? Get back over there with the rest of them.
This group will appreciate this story that Tim will confirm. That store had so many CDs, like just it was almost like a warehouse size. I mean, like just rows and rows and rows. And to Tim's point, they were like, you could go in there and they were like 10 for $1 or something like that. Not all the time, but like a lot of the time it was.
Mm-hmm.
But you would go through and like I'd give up after like 14 rows and I'd find like 9. Like it was stuff that I've never heard. Like I don't know where these CDs came from. I've never heard of most of the stuff that was there. And I'm like, I kept trying to trick myself. Like, I'm going to do one more row because I know that one thing I've been looking for is in that row. And then 6 rows later, I'm like, I've been here 2.5 hours and I've only found 9 CDs. I'm taking off.
I took a half day from work one time to go there because I knew it was going to take that long. I was like, I'm going to need 4 hours to make it through 20 rows. And that won't even be half of this. And I would come out with 5 CDs, but there was only 50 cents for these 5 CDs. Yeah. But I spent 4 hours to find them. It was there was nothing like that place. It was crazy. No. Something, Marissa, that you loved that no longer you love.
I can't answer this question. I swear to God, I am such a loyalist that the idea of rejecting something years down the line, I can't think of anything. I can think of albums that other people shame me for listening to. Does it?
I mean, if you want to go that way, you can.
Yeah, but... sure. I mean, because it's the only choice, or rather the only like category that comes remotely close to the one you designated, and that is. It's also kind of, I don't know if it counts because the band released it on their own label in 1990, and then it was re-released like officially in 1994, or by a a proper separate label, and that is Ferociously Stoned by the Cherry Poppin' Daddies, whose very band name,
Wow.
it pains me to utter, but I do
Whoa.
You said
sincerely
that, not
love
us.
them.
Huh.
But every time I bring them up, people are like, "Oh, the Zoot Suit Riot Band," and I'm like, "They're more than the Zoot Suit Riot Band."
There's so much more.
Yes, there really is. And one of the things I actually really admire about Steve Perry, who is the principal songwriter and the band leader, is that he has a true like chimeric love of all forms of popular music, from like ragtime and jazz to the contemporary era, and that knowledge and that love shines through his songwriting, and it may get derided by a lot of people as kitsch, or as garbage, but it is sincere, and it is in a lot of ways quite inventive still, and they're still touring and releasing records, and I think they're great.
Love it.
Completely failed at this part of this show.
I
but
know.
we
See,
will-
I'm a lover and not a hater at heart.
No, I'm with Marissa. I couldn't come up with one for this. So I'm gonna twist it as well. We'll just stay in that theme. I'm gonna twist it to, I wanted to love it at the time, bought it, tried really hard, didn't love it, revisited it now, still don't like it. The band is called, and I'm also gonna go super obscure, so I want to show of hands. The band is called Bloodline. Is anybody here familiar with a band called Bloodline? Chip?
No.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Well, maybe not. Is Bloodline the Mudhoney thing?
Nope.
Oh, what was it? Mark Arm had a band
So-
called Blood something.
So Bloodline was a band that got some pretty good press because it's made up of children of famous musicians. So the singer is Aaron Hagar, Sammy Hagar's son. Waylon
Oh, it's
Krieger,
already a bunch of douchebags.
right? Robbie Krieger's son. Barry Oakley, Barry Oakley Jr., son of Barry Oakley. Aaron Davis, the son of Miles Davis. And just rounded out Joe Bonamassa. So at the time, it was like,
What a weird collection of people.
I know. It was
Very
like hyped
eclectic.
as, I think, as like a Stevie Ray Vaughan type blues band with like all of these celebrities or whatever. And it does not work. I mean, it sounds
Mark
like
Arm-
third-rate Stevie Ray Vaughan, which nobody wants to hear. Like, I love
No.
Stevie Ray Vaughan, but nobody wants to hear third-rate Stevie Ray Vaughan.
No.
Mark Arm was in Blood Loss, not Bloodline.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, that makes more sense. That makes a lot more sense because Mark Arm as a part of that group would have been
Yeah.
a disaster. Okay, raise your hand if you have one that you would like to, because Marissa and Jay have both opted out. Ian, go ahead.
Okay, I can go, and I'm slightly cheating with this one, but for me, it's a KMFDM, Naive Hell to Go. So Naive was released in 1990, then was pulled and recalled because it contained a sample of O Fortuna that was not cleared or anything. So Sasha went back, remixed the album. And so obviously I got this album first because by the time Naive was off print. And then when I finally found a used CD that was $10 and not horribly expensive online and listened to the original Naive, this one has been relegated to the dust pile, and that the original album is phenomenal. These remixes, they're good. And I mean, I do enjoy them, but it's very much in line with what he was doing in 93 with Angst and then following up in 95 with Nile. So, but the original is superior in every way. And it's unfortunate that even the Metropolis release in 2006, the one song was edited and you can't get the original version. So, but it's one for me. Like I said, it's gone to the dust pile just because it's a toenail clipping almost.
Interesting. Jim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I outright dislike this record entirely. So of course I adored Nine Inch Nails, as we all do, I think to some extent, probably. But there was a film that came out that year that my friends and I thought was so cool. And a part of the experience after seeing it was going to the local CD store to get the soundtrack. And I'm talking about Natural Born Killers, which I played repeatedly in the car. And it has some great individual tracks, including Burn, obviously. But I'm just not a fan of the interstitial inclusion of dialogue from the movie in between songs, or sometimes even in the case of like Something I Can Never Have embedded in the actual song. So when I go back and listen to that now, I just don't like it anymore at all. So
Interesting. Yeah.
You've got fighting words there.
Oh, I figured that was going to happen. But there's some,
Yeah.
I mean, individual tracks, there's some great choices on there. And this was the first time Trent produced a soundtrack of any kind, and he would go on to do incredible
it
stuff.
was his first soundtrack, but I mean, I'm in the opposite. I love it. I still listen to it. It's a very unique approach to soundtracks and just this smorgasbord and collection of songs.
It is, yeah.
And that it has an excellent flow and that, yeah. I mean, like I said, I definitely disagree with you on that.
You got to be in the right frame of mind to want to listen to that, I think.
That's true.
Yeah.
I picked it up a couple of years ago and I hadn't listened to it in decades. And yeah, I mean, it's good. It's interesting, but yeah, it's not something I put on every day for sure.
I hope not. That would be a little
even during the Bob
crazy.
Dylan song, though, they include dialogue from the movie, and I'm just like, oh, don't do that. That's just me, though.
Got it.
It does bring it down a bit.
Yeah.
Chip.
So I don't know that I love this band, but a band that I bought a CD and interviewed.
The Boss Tones.
Mighty Boss Tones. There was for me that there was a momentary like, this is pretty cool stuff. I would be honest, part of the reason I probably ended up not liking that CD when I interviewed him, and I may have shared the story before. Keep in mind, this is print. No internet's around in 1994, at least not that I had. And I remember I was asking about videos, and Dickie Barrett came and he turned off my tape recorder, and he's like, I'm going to tell you about this video that we're putting out, but I don't want it to leak until people see it. So don't put this in your article. I'm like, dude, we're like 3-week lead time. This is a small magazine in Ohio. I'm not spoiling any surprise. And it was a video for, I forget what it was, one where they're all chained together and they're like escaped convicts, or they're like I don't even remember what the video was about. Maybe like the prison bus ran off the side of the road and they're running through the woods all chained together or something like that. But he was so adamant that like I had to turn it off and I couldn't tell anybody about this video because it was like so big for them and so inventive and so different and whatever. So yeah, I had a momentary flirtation with the Mighty Boss Tones, but yeah, that might be my one that I liked for a little bit of time, but not after.
So Jay, you might be surprised to hear this, but I did go through a Boss Tones phase.
Oh, of course you did. Is that where you turned when you left?
When I left Rusted Root, I put on my ska hat.
And Rusted Root broke your heart.
Side note: we were just watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and there's a scene where Andy Samberg's character flashes back to when he was in the 90s, and he's wearing like the hat and suspenders, and he's like, I love ska and I'll never turn my back on ska. And I
that was you.
No, I didn't go that far, but I did buy some Mighty Boss Tone CDs. I got Don't Know How to Party and Question the Answers, which came out back to back 93, 94, and I like those records. I was put off by Let's Face It and that the impression that I get because it was so overplayed on the radio, and it didn't have the chaos of some of their earlier stuff. Like there was a little bit of a chaos element with some of this. It just felt like aggressively happy, and the impression that I get felt, I don't know, lame compared to that. So, and then Dickie Barrett went off the rails. I think he got like kicked off the Jimmy Kimmel show for his COVID stance or refusing to get the vaccine. Like he quit instead of that. Eric, yes.
All right. So this album went, I believe, platinum. Guitar Rock magazine or Guitar World magazine says it's number 23 of the iconic albums that define 1994. It's currently sitting at 6% in the Patreon poll, and that is Promised Land by Queensrÿche, which I liked a lot more at the time than I do now. There are definitely some good songs on it. There's definitely some interesting things on it, but it absolutely is not the Queensrÿche record that I go back to at all.
I spun that recently because it was in the poll. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I was like, I need to go back and listen to Operation Mindcrime, and I put that on. I was like, oh my god, like this is intense. Like I'm staying here. I'm not. No, I'm in the right place here.
Ian,
I'm gonna go not so much, but still in the same theme, but songs on the radio from albums that I will automatically switch the station. And that's two albums I'm surprised over an hour and a half we haven't mentioned. Green Day Dookie and Soundgarden Super Unknown. I do not care for those albums. I've spoke my piece on the Discord many times about those albums, but I'm surprised they have not been mentioned yet.
Well,
they were so played.
They were so overplayed. And I think, limiting us to one answer and then a little follow-up afterward probably doom them in some respects. Because like, I don't know if you feel this way, Jay, but like, I don't mind some Soundgarden album tracks, but the singles I don't really care to hear anymore.
Yeah.
Like I like hearing like Rhinosaur or something deep off of that wasn't a big single off of a Soundgarden album. But I don't ever need to hear Fell on Black Days or something like that.
The album tracks on Super Unknown are so good compared to the singles.
Yeah.
Like Spoon Man is one of the worst songs that I think they've ever done. But I mean, then you've got other things on there like Limo Wreck.
That
song's fucking amazing. Like it's just
like Suicide.
It's so heavy. Like Suicide is great.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The album track's fantastic.
Yeah. I went through a little Green Day phase and I liked Dookie, but I can't listen to that record at all now. Like I got Nimrod when it came out and really like that, but and I've listened to some of the new record. It's okay, but it doesn't like make me go, oh, they're back. Like it just sounds like what they sound like. I am surprised that we have two Canadians here and we have not mentioned the Tragically Hip's Day for Night.
I have a list of Canadian bands that I was hoping to mention. So
same here. That one and 5440 Spine Buddha Cabaret.
Yeah.
I have one other Canadian on my list, but it won't be on your list, Kyle, but I'll mention it later.
I'm sure people, so we've gone through all of our categories here. So we need to talk about maybe our favorite records that didn't come up and other, stuff like that. I mentioned Tragically Hip's Day for Night. Jay, you'll probably be with me on this one. The Manic Street Preachers, The Holy Bible. To me, that's probably that's my favorite Manic Street Preachers album. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. We've done an episode on it.
Yeah.
So what are some albums that didn't get mentioned that you think are deserving of mention? I am going to start with Kyle.
All right. I'll just run down my list here of Canadian rock. So I've got The Hip, Day for Night, The Watchman, In the Trees, which was mentioned already. Fantastic album. I can't recommend that one enough. All Uncovered aside, Lusitana is also great. Middle Eastern, awesome. Other than that, I'm looking at Moist, Silver, Our Lady Peace, Navid, The Killjoys, Starry, Heads, Jerk, 5440, Smiling Buddha Cabaret, Sloan, Twice Removed, and Rhymes with Orange, Trapped in the Machine. Like, to me, like, I still listen to these albums probably once a year. I don't know why I'm waving the paper around, but fantastic. Like, just
point of order.
It just gets me so excited. Like, I love all those albums, and I listen to those probably every year.
Navid is a great record. I still have that in a mix on in my car.
The song is killer. That bass line that opens it.
Yes. I don't know what magic they had in that record. They never really sounded like that again, but Mike Turner's guitar playing on the record is phenomenal.
Somebody, I think it was probably Bob Rock, told at some point Rain Maida that he should stop singing like a weasel trapped in an oven that's slowly heating up, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to the band, aside from Mike Turner leaving.
Yeah, those were two bad things. Yeah, Pop Goes the Weasel.
The only other two I have are on Grantley Buffalo's Mighty Joe Moon. I listen to that quite a bit, and I'm actually surprised that they don't get mentioned more, but
it's one of those bands that doesn't seem to garner much discussion, but
you'll be pleased to know that they played a sold-out show at Bowery Ballroom in New York City very recently. So
that's good to know.
Wow, I didn't know they were still
appreciated here.
Awesome. And Jesus and Mary Chain, Stoned and Dethroned was one of my other big ones that year.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, here, I'll add on to the Canadian list here.
Canadians.
The only other Canadian band I have is Frontline Assembly, Millennium. So they incorporate a lot of the heavy metal guitar. They had Devin Townsend from Strapping Young and Glad on this album, doing a lot of guitar work. It is a bit overlooked. I mean, following Caustic Grip and Tactical Neuro Implant, but it's still a very solid album. Other albums on my list, Pop Will Eat Itself, Dos Dios Mis Amigo, and that. And another great album from them. Unfortunately, it was their last one. This one was also released on Trent Reznor's Nothing imprint. Other ones, some older legacy bands that I caught up with, in part because of my parents. The first one, Pink Floyd, The Division Bell. Obviously doesn't touch the stuff that they did with Roger Waters in the 70s, but it is still a good album and phenomenal tour, which would be documented with Pulse a few years later. And
where did you see them?
I didn't see them, unfortunately. I was away getting my glider pilot's license when they were.
Okay. I saw that tour in Edmonton. It was awesome.
Yeah. And
anybody get the live Pulse CD that had the little light?
The little LED, yep.
Does it still blink?
Well,
I don't have the CD anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. And then, but the other albums, similar way, going back with older bands, Rolling Stones, Voodoo Lounge, and that. I mean, it's a solid album. I mean, it doesn't hold a candle to their earlier stuff.
Right.
Alice Cooper, Last Temptation, as well. And then other ones going back for my style, Autechre, Amber, Killing Joke, Pandemonium. This was their first album without Youth on bass, so it is a bit lacking compared to other Killing Joke albums, but I still enjoy it from time to time. And then the last one is a compilation that I should give to you guys for a Dig Me Out review, but I don't think 40 tracks would cut it. Black Box, Wax Tracks, the first 13 years, which is a compilation that TVT Records released when they bought the label. Fuck you, Steve. But yeah, it is a solid compilation and definitely is a good representation of the industrial genre, especially with what was going on in Chicago. The only absence on it, probably due to rights, would be Front 242's Headhunter.
I thought you were referencing Black Box, the house band.
House band? Yeah, I don't
with
think.
Everybody,
Yeah, no,
which is one of my favorite club anthems.
no. This is, like I said, it was a compilation. So
Got it.
yeah.
Marissa.
File under easy listening.
Yes, that's a great record.
Sugar. I had to throw that in there because I can't believe I hadn't mentioned it or that nobody else had. I prefer, always have preferred Sugar to Husker Du, and I just love
Same.
everything that he's done, either as a solo artist or with that band. So
that record, it's another one that I have like in my massive playlist when I drive. It's so big sounding. That and Copper Blue, they just sound so enormous. Like so many guitars, and I was thinking about the fact that like G Angel and the other songs, like I don't think there's any toms on some of those songs. Like it's just snare, kick, and hi-hat, just pounding. Every fill is a snare fill. There are no like tom fills on those songs. It's just so on top of it. It's awesome. Any other ones?
not.
Was that it?
I think all my bases were covered by
your bases covered? Okay.
the other citizens of the DMO union. So
Eric.
All right. So a quick couple of them. Animal Bag's Offering EP, which we talked about in an episode. We don't really need to go into that again. Probably my favorite album from the year was Dogman by King's X. Liquor in the Front by Reverend Horton Heat is one that from that year that I think is where they really hit their stride. I like the earlier records a little more raw, but this is where they really gelled as it's a studio band, I guess you could say. Kevin Kenny's Down Outlaw. This was kind of a very blues acoustic record, and I don't love every song on it, but I think it's an interesting companion to what was going on with Driving and Crying at the time, and a follow-up to his first solo record. There's an album by a band called Die Monster Die. It's called The Withdrawal Method, that I've had in my collection forever. I've never sold it. I've never really loved it, but it's an oddball record that I just keep around. And then finally, one I keep thinking that I should throw in the hopper, or I should pick as a yearly pick, and that's the album Brave by the band Marillion, which is a concept record that is not quite prog metal, but very prog rock. And I think it's a great record that I guess they're much bigger in Europe, in the UK, than they are in the States, but it's one that definitely people should check out.
Cool. That's a band I've always heard that name, and I've never checked out their stuff. Need to check them out. Jim, what do you got?
Yeah, I know somebody earlier mentioned a compilation, the DGC Rarities, Volume 1. I mean, every band on there I pretty much love, and I think more people need to listen to that dog. So I'm glad that they're included on there. Let's see. Hole. I still love Hole. I mean, say what you will about Courtney Love, but I think Hole Live Through This is still, a beautifully constructed piece of catharsis. And the fact that I saw Hole, Nine Inch Nails, and Marilyn Manson play all in a row at a and I thought I was going to die at the concert because I'd never experienced getting, a boot to the head. Thanks to crowd surfing and moshing and all this stuff that I never experienced before. So that's a show that I'll never forget. So Hole still has a special place in my heart. Low's record, I Could Live in Hope. Just they're always gonna be one of my favorite bands, and that's kind of where I first started listening to them. And probably the album I've fallen asleep to the most and definitely have had weird dreams is Aphex Twin's Selected Ambient Works Volume 2.
There you go. Yes, I was waiting for that to get mentioned. Great sleeping record. Chip.
All right, here we go. I've got the ones over my shoulders, Veruca Salt's debut, American Thighs, and Pavement's Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. Two albums that I have been listening to for 30 years and not ever put aside. Hole was on my list. The first Stabbing Westward album, On God. Diary by Sunny Day Real Estate came out in 94.
Mm-hmm.
The album that I'm a little bit surprised it didn't come up in one of these categories, love it or hate it, was Weezer's Blue album, came out in 94.
Yep.
Um, because of Green Day, like I did not listen to Whatever You Want. Like in my mind, that was punk music. I don't know if it's true definition of punk, but um, because of Green Day, I went back 94, Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction came out, and I love that record. I got turned on to Rancid because of Green Day, Let's Go. And in the heavy category, Pantera's Far Beyond Driven. Meat Puppets kind of became more commercialized and put out something that had radio hits with Too High to Die.
Mm-hmm.
And two more on my list. I don't, this is one of those albums that I own, but I always listen to the single. And it's, and I don't even know how to say the single's name. It's by the band Therapy. And I think is it Screamager, something like that. It's such a great kind of riffy, it's like not heavy like Helmet, but it's kind of got that start and stop kind of riffs. Also, the last thing on my list is, so I think this was between Pablo Honey and the Bends. Radiohead put out a single that had My Iron Lung on it. And I remember getting that as an import at a store. And that song is so different than the stuff on Pablo Honey. Like that song was just like, it starts off kind of quiet and builds up, and then it gets really heavy and then goes back and forth between quiet and heavy. And like that EP, I still have that CD EP. That song blew my mind. Like I thought that was
does that have Permanent Daylight on it? Because that song just kind of blew me away. Like it's
Polyethylene, I think is on
yeah,
it.
that one's good too, maybe.
Yeah.
Meet Me in the Aisles or Meeting People is Easy.
It's Permanent Daylight, Lewis Mistreated, You Never Wash Up, The Trickster, Punch Drunk Lovesick, Lajin of Love, and Creep Acoustic are the tracks. This is when you get an EP and there'd be like 9 tracks on it. It's basically an album.
Yeah. No, Permanent Daylight just made me think like, oh, this band could be like Sonic Youth. That is just, it totally reminded me of Daydream Nation. And when they played it live, like for the Hail to the Thief tour, I was the only one who got excited in the crowd because I'm like, I know this song and nobody else does. Oh my God, it's so great they're playing it.
Any other ones,
Chip?
Chip?
Has exhausted my list.
That's exhausted list. It. Okay. Jay, what do you want to mention that hasn't been mentioned?
I'll just knock out some that we've done on the podcast that I discovered. Gun Swagger.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Trina and Cockamamie.
Love that record.
Into Another.
Yep.
Is it Ignore Us?
Ignore Us.
Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction. Smile. Is it Macu?
Yep.
I think that's it. Extreme, Waiting for the Punchline is another one. We've reviewed all those and I think they're pretty solid.
So I got to mention a couple. Mirza, I am surprised. I thought you might have mentioned the What Is Jail Like EP by the Afghan Wigs because it has 7 songs, including their My World Is Empty Without You, I Hear a Symphony cover, which
I didn't know if it fit the criteria.
Sure.
So
this is the year of EPs. This is the Jar of Fly year. I love their cover of Dark End of the Street. One of my favorite Wigs covers. And they did, obviously the Wigs have done a ton of covers, but that's one of my favorite covers of theirs.
Greg Dooley is, and I know that I'm biased, but I really do think that he is the best cover artist of the 90s. I mean,
I completely agree. Yeah.
Incredible facility for not just great performances, loving homage, but reinvention, which is what makes a fantastic cover.
Another EP that I love from this year is Matthew Sweet's Son of Altered Beast EP, which has Super Deformed on it, and his cover of Neil Young's Don't Cry No Tears. It's a great little EP. That one and the What Jail's Like and Jar of Flies was a really good year for EPs. Few other things to mention that haven't been mentioned. I'm a big fan of Soul Coughing. Ruby Vroom came out this year. This is the year of Pisces Iscariot by the Smashing Pumpkins, which is a compilation of B-sides and rarities, but to me is like as good as their material in the 90s. Dogman Star by Suede, that's this year. A album and band that we discovered through the podcast, The Wannadies. Their album Be a Girl came out this year. It's great British power pop record. Season to Risks, In a Perfect World, which we talked about on the podcast a couple years back. Very good record. We've mentioned a bunch of the bands, Green Day, Bad Religion, Rancid. This is also the year of the Offspring Smash, which was at the time the most successful independent record of all time when it was released. I don't know that I ever bought the record, but I always dug the singles from that album. I didn't really like anything they did after that. Well, actually, the record after this was okay, and then when they got into like,
Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
Yeah, that was when I lost my interest completely. This is the year of Frank Black's Teenager of the Year, which I liked that record. Caius's Welcome to Sky Valley. Sebadoh's Bake Sale, again, another one I believe we did for the podcast. This shirt, Dinosaur Jr. Without a Sound, that's this year. Great record.
I feel the pain of everyone, but then I feel nothing. I feel the pain of everyone, but then I feel nothing.
And another one that we did, this is a long time ago, but Blind Mr. Jones' Tatooine, which is a kind of shoegazy dream pop record that was really good. And this is also the year of the soundtracks that I mentioned at the top. We already talked about Natural Born Killers. We talked about The Crow. Also, this is the year of Clerks, which has a really good soundtrack. There's a great song by Alice in Chains on there. There's the debut of Golden Smog, which is the supergroup starring Dave Pirner and Jeff Tweedy and Gary Loris. And they do, I think, Shooting Star by Bad Company. This is My So-Called Life. That's this year, their soundtrack. Ton of great bands, including the Afghan Wigs and Buffalo Tom and a bunch of other bands. This is the year of the Reality Bites soundtrack and Airheads. The Airhead soundtrack. So this is a great year for soundtracks all over the place. And that's just the big ones that I remember. There's a bunch of other ones because there's a lot of, this is when the movie industry also figured out that they could make money releasing soundtracks and having, stuff oriented towards Gen X in terms of movies.
Pulp Fiction was in there too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Pulp
yeah.
Fiction.
With Urge Overkill.
Yep. Great call.
That's a huge song.
Yeah.
So I want to mention some of the comments for some of the albums that didn't come up. Jeff Gentis, who was going to try to be here, but he couldn't. He mentioned that on May 10th, 1994, the following records were released. Sunny Day Real Estate's Diary, Weezer's Blue Album, Sonic Youth's Experimental Jet Set, and G-Love and the Special Sauce self-titled. Now, it's not the same as like September of 1991 when a whole bunch of stuff all came out on the same day, but that's a pretty good lineup of albums. And then Richard Waterman, he's got some picks, some that we've already mentioned, but Adorable's album Fake, Adrian Belew's album Here, Animal Bag, which we already mentioned, Bark Psychosis Hex, the self-titled album by Deconstruction. Is that the Dave Navarro band?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Gand Harvest, Kicking in the Water. Is that a Canadian band? Gand Harvest? I don't know. The God Machines, One Last Laugh in a Place of Dying. Head Swims, Tense Moments, Inch Stressor, Love Cup, Griefus, Gronks and Sheet. Griefus, Gronks and Sheet. I thought there was a whole nother band. Sorry. Molly McGuire's Sister of, O-Rang's Herd of Instinct, Sensefields, Killed for Less, Sleazebees, Instant Insanity Beach. Why was there no mention of Sleazebees until now, Jay? What's going on?
Because we're saving
Chip,
it for something
come on.
else. We're saving
Yeah.
it for something else.
Okay. Smack Melon, self-titled, Superchunk, which was Sweet Pickle Salad, which is that the Black
The
Crows
Black
thing?
Crowes side project, yeah.
Yeah, with one of the guys from Jellyfish.
Yep.
Terror Visions, How to Make Friends and Influence People. Tetsu Inoue, Ambient Otaku. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. Tortoise. The Velt's Aphrodisiac. Velvet Crush's Teenage Symphonies to God. Widowmaker's Stand By for Pain. The 360's Strawberry Stone. 5440, which we mentioned earlier. The DGC Rarities. The SFW soundtrack, which that was another one that had a bunch of stuff on it, and I completely forgot about that one. And he said, keep on rocking. So I think we have mentioned a good portion of the albums that came out this year. I'm sure we forgot maybe one or two. Eric's raising a finger. Which one did we forget, Eric? What was the one we forgot?
It's not the one we forgot. I just wanted to mention this is also the year of the Kiss tribute record, the Carpenters tribute record, and the Black Sabbath tribute record, which, as I recall, might have been the critical mass that really started the ball rolling for that particular era of multiple bands covering a single artist.
Yeah.
That Kiss record's good.
Carpenters, when I wrote for that magazine, that Carpenters record, we got an advance copy, and I, the little gimmick for the magazine was that I sent it to my mom, who had been a Carpenters fan when I was a little kid, and asked her to write her review of it. I don't think it was a very good review. I don't know if it was a good album either. I think didn't Sonic Youth play on it?
Yeah.
I can't imagine my mom was a Sonic Youth fan.
And that was it was used in Juno. That was like a big deal in one of the scenes in Juno it was Superstar, right? That's the name of the song?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew Sweet's on there too. He did a really great job.
So is Shonen Knife. That might have been one of the first places that Shonen Knife got actual distribution everywhere rather than just your local indie store.
Interesting. Ian, hand raised.
I guess the one other thing that came out this year, and it's probably the best one that we can probably leave on, was Nirvana's Unplugged, and that. I mean, obviously released after Kurt Cobain's suicide and that. So that was also this year and huge.
Yeah, that's probably a good stopping point in terms of also because we're at the 2-hour mark and I don't want to go to 4. So this is probably a good place for us to say, hey, if we forgot a record, please hit us up in the comments on social media or join us over at Patreon and tell us in the Discord or on the comments for this episode where we messed up. What did we forget?
The conversation will definitely continue in the Discord.
Oh yeah, but this definitely massive year. What do we got there? What's that? Chip, what'd you hold up?
Luscious Jackson. We didn't talk about that. Natural Ingredients.
Oh, Natural Ingredients. That's right.
Worthy of talking about, but that is another. I was just flipping through to see all the different people that made the covers of these magazines, and they made a cover. So,
can I just say about the Nirvana record that encapsulates a lot of what we just talked about with covers and heavier songs and the whole idea of going acoustic and going back to kind of more roots rock and blues.
Yep. That was huge. It was so big when it came out.
I don't know of anybody that didn't actually own that album, and it still holds up today. Like it's a great experience. Thank you,
all of you, for spending your Wednesday evenings with us. I know you all have to get up for work tomorrow. So I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you to Marissa, Eric, Ian, Jim, Chip, and Kyle. You've all been great. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Jay, we have another podcast we should probably promote. It's called what? What's it called?
Dig Me Out 80s Metal.
Dig Me Out 80s Metal. Our friend Chip, who's with us now, we do this every other week. We talk about some 80s metal. We just did Tesla, and soon we'll be doing another one. Very soon.
We will.
Tomorrow.
It's a separate feed, so go to your podcast app of choice and search Dig Me Out.
Yep.
And it'll come up.
Maybe we'll do some Sleazebees sometime in the future.
Well, yeah,
never
we're
know.
taking
Oh,
suggestions.
we will, Tim.
At the,
I'm so scared of what's coming down the road.
yeah, Chip and I are the experts. Tim knows nothing about any of these bands. So
we're
that's
doing the
kind of-
second record now, and I'm not going to spoil it, but I had never listened to this record before, and I am befuddled. I have maximum fuddlement. The fuddlement is off the charts.
Can't wait.
It's going to be a discussion. I want to mention that you can suggest those records both for the 80s metal podcast and for our 90s rock podcast at digmeoutpodcast.com. You can join us at Patreon, dmounion.com, or digmeoutunion.com. Box newsletter comes out every week. It's at Substack, and Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.